wants to take that jump. No, probably don't find. If I was the mayor, I'd be all in front of this.
Oh man, right? Get out of the way.
Here's what structural change is needed, and it's going to take it off my plate. That's a win all the way around. Everybody would stand up. Yes.
I mean, even people who had no business being politicians like Schwarzenegger or Jesse Ventura, the ones that succeeded, got the right people, got that out of the way.
Test.
Test.
Test. Woohoo.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Spokane Public Library. My name is Shane. I'm the current affairs specialist, and we're going to get started in just a minute here. I'm going to start by reading our land acknowledgement. Oh, boy. We are on the traditional homelands of the four bands of the Spokane Tribe of Indians: Upper Band, Middle Band, Lower Band, Chewelah Band. Since time immemorial, the Spokane Tribe of Indians has lived and cared for these grounds, identifying themselves as flesh of the earth. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We show gratitude to the land, river, and peoples who have been fishing, hunting, harvesting, and gathering here for generations. May we learn from one another's stories so that we may nurture the relationship of the people of Spokane Tribe and to all those who share this land. A bit of housekeeping before we get started. So this branch closes at 7. This is scheduled until 7, but that's perfectly fine. I'm just letting you know, so if it looks like people are around shutting things down, that's just a normal part, and we'll get you out in a normal way after the event. So that's all fine. Secondly, we have another event next week. Range Media will be here recording a live podcast next Wednesday at 7 o'clock here on this stage. Luke Baumgarten will be joined by guests from Fair Vote Washington and the League of Women Voters to discuss the potential advantages and downsides of ranked choice voting. So that should be an interesting event. I want to thank all of you for showing up to this event. I know we all care about the city of Spokane and this issue of homelessness and want to hear about potential solutions. I want to thank Jacob Grady for helping me to envision and organize this event. He and I were noticing there are lots of different stakeholders involved in this issue. There are business owners who feel like their businesses are being affected. There are activists and nonprofits trying to address the needs of the homeless population. There's the homeless population themselves, and then there's all the rest of us. And we noticed there's a lot of talking, a lot of complaining, and often not to each other. And so we wanted to put together an event that would address practical solutions to this problem. I'd been interested in the work that Gavin's doing, so we spoke with him, and then he brought along Chris and Ben to share their hard-won insights. And so, of course, I want to thank the three of you for being here. We've got Gavin Cooley, who was the CFO of the City of Spokane for 17 years and is currently the host of Housing and Help, which is a documentary series on homelessness here in Spokane. Chris Patterson is a former regional administrator of the Department of Housing and Urban Development and is currently chair of Hello for Good and, as well, the Community Solutions Advisor for Washington Trust Bank. They can talk more about their bios in a minute. And then finally, Ben Stuckart is a former city council president and is now the executive director of the Low Income Housing Consortium. So I thought we would begin tonight with Gavin, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you came to be involved in this issue, what you've learned along the way, and what you see as the most plausible path forward for making meaningful progress on the issue of homelessness.
Thank you, Shane. And thank you for bringing us together, Shane and Jacob. Really appreciate it. I think as far as just bio goes, the one thing I would say about my background at the city, having done the CFO position for actually 18 years, that was 6 mayors. And it began with the first strong mayor that we started in 2001, John Powers, and all the way through almost to current. And the thing I learned over that time, there's a few things I learned, and I'll talk about them in the context of homelessness, but they're kind of time-worn lessons and not much beyond common sense in many cases. But I definitely saw what works through those 6 administrations, and 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. I saw what doesn't work. Most, I will say with a big exclamation point, that most local problems are not partisan in nature at all. And so I'll just skip straight to homelessness. I think I need to start just by defining the population that we're talking about at this stage of the conversation, which is the chronically homeless. Those are the people we're seeing on the streets, and they're the most visible part of the problem that we're having with homelessness. There's a big, huge problem, underlying problem in society. I was just doing the math in my head a few days ago that when my parents bought their house, and it could be any house, in the early 60s, early to mid 60s, and if you rolled that average forward of what that price of a home was then, the average price of a home today for young people buying their first home would be in the neighborhood of about $120,000 to $125,000. Well, we know it's about 3 times that. So that's creating a huge social displacement that we have to figure out, and we can't just look the other way on that one. That's affecting society, and it's affecting some of us more than others, but it's an underlying instability in the financial integrity of our nation. But we're not talking about that today. We're talking about the chronically homeless. And if you're here today worried about the people that you're seeing on the streets and how they're affecting your neighborhoods and how they're affecting our businesses and how they're affecting our downtown and the overall social fabric of our community, and that's your sole concern being here, then you're right to be concerned, because it is a serious problem in our community. And if you want to go around the country and see places where there's been a breakdown in that kind of business construct and neighborhood construct, you can go to those places and you can buy a 5,000 square foot home for about $100,000, because there's a complete breakdown in the social fabric there. There's not public safety. There's not the basic things we depend upon to have a healthy community. So that is a big concern. But say your only concern instead is compassion for those people that we see on the streets, and what they're going through. And it's, and I kind of, before I got involved with this, I would compartmentalize that in my mind. But this series, this Housing and Help that Ben Stuckart got me involved in, and I'm really thankful for that, didn't allow me to compartmentalize that. And there's a ton of room for compassion for these people. If that's your sole concern, it can be. But I've never yet seen an issue where it's a both and. Because the solution for those people, approximate 2,000 people that are living on the streets, the chronically homeless, is exactly the same solution for solving our problems with them being on the streets and experiencing what they're experiencing. But the negative impact they're having on our downtown, it's real. The negative impact they're having in our neighborhoods, it's real. So we need to solve that at the same time that we're solving the problems of the very people experiencing that. And it turns out that the solution to that problem is, in fact, getting a roof over their heads and giving them the services that they need. Now, going back to the chronically homeless, about 70% of these individuals, it's an estimate, are experiencing severe mental illness and or addiction issues. And there's a good chance that a large portion of this population will never work again. They will be, you're going to have to work with that. But it's the same percentage of the population, strangely, even with all the worst drugs that we know are out there and everything else. It's about the same percentage of our population today that it was back in 1950, 60, 1970, before they deinstitutionalized the mentally ill in our country. And it's about that same percentage. So we had the same problem back then. We deinstitutionalized for a lot of good reasons. That system wasn't working, but we didn't replace it with something that was working. And now this is what we see. So this has to be solved. And the solution is a roof and services. And I'll just say, and Ben and Chris will both get into this, but going down to Houston, which is the one city in America that has figured this out because they decreased their homeless population, 4th largest city in America, 63%, double what any large city in America has done so far. And we'll talk about how they got it done because, again, it's kind of common sense. But they've decreased it double, and they did it in a very, very straightforward way. But they come up with the numbers. And the counties, the 4 counties surrounding Houston and the city of Houston have run the numbers, all those entities and others. And in most cases, the cost and now I'm talking as a CFO for 18 years of our city, the cost of providing a roof and services is somewhere in the neighborhood of $25,000 to $35,000 a year, not local dollars, mostly federal dollars. So there's not going to be some big tax increase or anything else. Can we afford it? Absolutely. And the cost of having them on the streets is anywhere from $45,000 to about $100,000 a year. And you don't have to be good at math to say, wow, even if I am entirely antagonistic towards these individuals experiencing this situation they're going through on the streets, it's far, far cheaper and more effective to get them off the streets by giving them housing and services that they need. And if anybody thinks the criminal justice system is the way to deal with this, and I get it, so, there's a strong feeling about accountability in our nation, and that makes sense to me. But I can, as the CFO of the city, I can tell you the worst possible tool you could use, fiscally and behaviorally, is the criminal justice system to deal with homelessness. It'd be like spraying a fire with gasoline. You can't think of a worse tool. And I know that you'll hear some people just stand up and give you that, that really simple answer. We just gotta come down on this and we can fix it. And they're selling you something that's not real. And I can't begin to tell you the cost of expanding the criminal justice system, because it's not just the jail. That's what they kind of talk about, jail. It's the jail, and it's the public defender, and it's the prosecutor, it's the municipal court, and the district court, and the superior court, and it goes way beyond that, the police department and the sheriff's department. I've done a lot of ride-alongs with the PD, and when they have to book somebody, it's kind of their whole shift is shot, so they're not on the streets, they're booking somebody, and then they're out the next, in a short period of time. So anyway, that's kind of the short answer on my end. Just a quick summary, and I'm really excited to talk about Houston and how they've done it, because it's all about collaboration, leadership, which is something that we have to do. That's actually the hardest thing imaginable to do, but I'll let these gentlemen move to that.
Yeah, I thought I'd pass it over to Chris. And Chris, if you could tell us just a little bit about your background dealing with this issue, how you came to it, and some of the insights you've gained in your experience working on this.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've gotten the chance, I've known Ben a long time in different circles and Gavin in different circles, but when we had the chance to talk about this, it made kind of, I was like, oh, the light bulb goes off. Why don't we just to get together? Because people would look at what are our outcomes? So my lifetime here in Spokane, I was born at St. Luke's in May 30th of 1969, so I'm born and raised. I've been in the field of social services for about 28 years. I work with criminally insane, mentally ill, developmentally delayed, autistic, schizophrenic, bipolar, trafficked, sexually abused, all the above. And having also served as the former Region 9 HUD administrator, which is California, Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, Guam, and the Pacific Islands, I can tell you what Spokane does not want to become. You do not want to become the issues of Skid Row, where you have 60,000 plus unsheltered people in California, in Los Angeles area alone, due to political friction and NIMBYism. The not in my backyard is real. It is challenging. It's frustration for everybody who lives in the city. I still live. This is my home. I think the biggest thing that my takeaways is that you can come up with practical solutions that are realistic. They're going to deal with veterans homelessness, mental health co-occurring, youth homelessness. As an example, there's 23,000 plus foster youth who age out of the foster care system each year that become homeless, trafficked, or worse. So you think the pipeline of how we can actually get in front of that. So if we actually were to work with good policy, we do not have to agree politically. That's the thing. You don't have to have the same beliefs and structure in something. There's faith-based, non-faith-based, for-profits, non-profits, all of the above. You need the public sector, the private sector. You need everybody to come together to work with each other, because the government cannot do this alone at all. It's going to take creative thinking with investors. I've had a lot of opportunity to work with investors throughout the country. Spokane is an opportunity for places to come. Yes, we're going to grow. So if we are not prepared for the growth that Spokane is going to have, when we become 708,000 population, we will. years down the road, maybe it's not that far away, but Spokane is a destination point. We have to have our infrastructure, our systems, and our accountability measures put into place to where it works, which means the judicial, law enforcement, courts, on Supreme Court, District Court, all the way down to community court. You know, I am a former ward of the court. I grew up on the foster care system. I aged out. Yes, accountability was part of my life. Yes, I got in trouble quite a bit as a kid. So if I didn't have measures of accountability and structures for people holding me to my feet to the fire, I would not have survived. I either would have been in prison or dead. It's just that simple. So when you deal with the people on the street we're seeing, there's a mixed bag approach. Yes, we're hearing about it on the news nonstop, but what you're not hearing about is what people are doing quietly, behind the scenes, not in front of the cameras, not in front of the pen and paper, such as Ben, Gavin, and myself and others, and Hello for Good, which I'm one of the co-chairs for, and Katie Bruyere at Waugh Trust. We're putting everything we can to support to make sure we come up with solutions, which means you'll have to tackle the Growth Management Act at some point in time. That's just something you're going to have to deal with no matter what. Infill is a good thing. It gives you an opportunity for development. It gives an opportunity for investors to come, whether you're local or outside Spokane, to invest in the community. That brings jobs. That brings trade skilled laborers. That brings a lot of opportunity for things that we need. And we're going to continue to need. It pays for law enforcement, it pays for fire EMS, it pays for everything else we do. You need it all. There's not one part of that solution you do not have. And it does mean that we've had some pretty entertaining conversations over the last year, but none of us have had anything that was disrespectful. None of us have had anything that was unrealistic, and pretty much 90% of the time we agree. Because politics doesn't come into the discussion for it, because we're focused on the mission at hand, and that is to finish and get to an end of where we want to go. That is the crux of what we're trying to do. We can't put that in the paper, we can't put it in a video to put it on the news every single night to remind you as citizens how and what we're doing. We're just telling you we are trying to do something quietly. This is not about accolades or attention or look at us. We just know it has to be done, and you have to have leadership that are willing to step up, and you're gonna get the knives in the front, you're gonna get the knives in the back, you're gonna become everybody's frenemy, and that's okay, it goes with the territory. But as long as you're doing something for the sense of community, then that's the whole point.
Thank you. Ben, can you tell us a little bit about your history with this issue and what you've been up to and what you've learned?
Oh, I lost an election on this issue, so I made it a point to work on this issue because my dad ran SNAP for 38 years. I've been enmeshed in addressing poverty in our community since I was 3 years old. I doubled funding for human services while I was at the city and actually did try to make a difference. One of the times when downtown got better was when David and I, David Condon, the mayor, and I instituted 24/7 for our shelter system. And unfortunately that got caught up in politics and defunded, but it actually improved the situation for about 12 months at that point. But it costs money and it costs issues. But I want to just real quick, I know you were throwing out those states really quick, but I heard you say infill, that's good. GMA, we need to address it. If you're not going to allow cities to grow out, but you don't mandate that they grow up, then you stick them in a box. And when you stick a city in a box, what happens is you don't build more housing, and it's a pure economic issue, and it's a supply and demand issue. And when you have no supply of housing in a community, our apartments are at 0.5% vacancy rates. We see what's happened in the last 3 years, which is rentals in Spokane have gone up over 60%, and home ownership has gone up over 50% in the last 3 years. An assistant professor at the University of Washington and a data analyst from the Tacoma Tribune put out a book in April of this year, and the title of the book's pretty like homelessness is a housing problem, is the title of the book. They looked at the 30 largest cities in the United States, and the only correlation, not causation, but they looked at data and did it, okay, here's the population of homelessness, And then here on this axis is the population, like high poverty rates. Detroit has really high poverty rates, but it has low number of homelessness. But they also have low rents. The cities that have the highest populations of homelessness that have seen increases, it tracks with your increase in rents in a city. So our market rate housing is just as important to keep people housed. If we don't accept that we need mixed income neighborhoods in our community and that we need density in our community, we are going to continue to see homelessness rise. Now, what Gavin talked about is Houston. Gavin and I spent 4 days interviewing people in Houston because I was actually, it was the predecessor to Hello for Good. It was a group, commercial group led by Chud Wendell. And they had invited the mayor's advisor to, on homelessness, Mark Eichenbaum is his name. And he was speaking to this group of business leaders about what they'd learned in Houston. And so started digging in on Houston and then started raising money because I thought more people needed to learn about Houston. And then when we went down there, we were blown away. And one of the things that Gavin and I, under 8 years and working on the city council with Gavin as the CFO, is we really learned, like, if you saw what we did with the streets, it's now how it's a street levy instead of what happened under Jim West, which was a street bond that only provided 10 years worth of streets, but after we had to pay them back in 20. So instead, we converted that into a levy, and taxes didn't rise, but we got perpetual money for the streets. And so a lot of times problems are not revenue-based problems, but they're how you use your resources that you have now. Right now, our homeless system has 8 different groups making decisions: the city council, the city administration, the CHHS department and board, the county board that makes decisions, the county commissioners. Philanthropy isn't tied into any of the government funding at all. The Continuum of Care, which handles $5 million in HUD dollars every year, and you have the business community that actually wants to put resources. And you have 8 different entities that want to be part of the solution. And what did Houston say? Well, you're not all going to just toss your money where you want. We're going to get you all in a room and put you on one board, and that board is going to be in charge of planning. Because I don't know if you've read, but yesterday 2 letters were sent to the city. One from the Hope House, which is a brand new building that the city helped fund downtown, but they're going to close in a month and a half, and it's our only shelter for single women in this community, and they are going to close. I've had 4 different conversations with Fawn over the last few days and talked to all the city council members and talked to people in the CHHS department. But you just signed a so they're short. Family Promise just sent the same letter that they're short of $1.5 million, and that's our only family shelter in town that's low barrier. They're both going to close in 2 months. Yet you just signed a contract for $6.6 million for another shelter that doesn't raise a single dollar of private money. If you knew everybody that currently existed that was housing single women and housing families, why in the heck would you go spend $6.6 million on a new shelter if you can't afford the current shelters that you have and you have no way to pay for your shelters? Oh, and then what happened? The document that came out on Thursday, the budget? The budget came out, and on page 18, there's a line that says we're going to use all $7 million of the low-income housing dollars that the city has, and we're going to use it for shelters. We're going to use the long-term, the only money that's local for long-term solutions to homelessness. We're going to use it for the Band-Aid solution. That is a lack of planning. That is a lack of having a plan that says to get from A to B, we need a plan. Houston said they got everybody in a room, and they said, we know you, HUD told them, you're going to lose all your money if you don't figure this out. They had a strong mayor that said, we're going to get everybody in a room, we're going to get business, we're going to get the philanthropy in the room, we're going to get the 4 counties, we're going to get the city in the room, and we're going to say, we're all going to pool our money, and we're going to create one nonprofit, a regional housing, a homelessness authority. It's a nonprofit run by all these agencies. Everybody still gets a voice, but your voice doesn't mean you get to go spend your money over here. when somebody else is already duplicating those services over here. And if your agency isn't accountable, that's the one agency in town. What happens now is if somebody loses their funding from one of the 8 different funding agencies, they go to the other 7 and say, hey, come on, we can't close our service down. And those other 7 backfill for the one agency that may be trying to hold them accountable. It made for a more efficient system. And so what did Houston do? They pooled all of their resources together. They held a 3-day charrette as a community, came up with a community plan. That plan was to offer housing and help to individuals that were chronically homeless. They have housed, in the last 10 years, 25,000 people. They have built 8,500 units of permanent supportive housing, and homelessness has decreased by 63%. And they just went and said, we're going to decrease it more. So at the same time, back in 2011, when HUD was putting Houston on notice, they put Atlanta on notice. And Atlanta spent hundreds of millions of dollars, and their numbers kept going up. So they went and hired the consultant that implemented the plan in Houston, and then they saw a 6-year decrease of 40% homelessness. They're the other town that has seen a large decrease in homelessness because you're housing people, giving them help, and it really doesn't matter if we want to say they don't deserve it, because that argument doesn't make sense when you're talking it's half the price to house somebody and give them that home and a door with those services so they can get better and become participating members of the community than it does to have them on the streets, filling up the emergency room, calling 911, and affecting our neighborhoods and businesses. So there's a purely economic argument for it. Like the economic argument itself, like we don't have to get into any of the moralistic arguments or community arguments. It's just Houston did it. It's the blueprint. We need to get there to the point where every funder is in a room and saying, you know, I will give up control. And if every funder did that right now, if every elected official stood up and said, we're willing to centralize our money, Houston works, this is why we're going to do it, they would all be heroes. And they would all win. It's a huge political win. Plus, what does it do? It takes it off your plate as a politician. Like something like this is a nasty political issue that can turn on you in a second in one decision. And you get it off your plate for a solution. So that's my spastic response. Sorry, bad word. I got really, really excited, and I apologize.
You have a lapel, right?
Oh, right. I want to talk twice. I agree with everything Chris has said, and I agree with everything Ben has said, and it gets back to the nonpartisan kind of nature of this problem. I'm going to give an example because Ben talked a lot about what Houston did and Atlanta did, and Anise Parker was a 3-term mayor down there. And she just kept harping on this notion of getting everybody under one roof, talking to each other, coordinating, sharing data, moving in the same direction, sharing a strategic direction. And once you did that, money was the least of their problems. And to emphasize that, when I asked Mark Eichenbaum, the guy Ben alluded to that works in the mayor's office, I said, so how did you raise the money to do all these things that we're looking at? Because we were there for 4 days, like Ben said, and saw amazing infrastructure for dealing with the homelessness. And I said, how did you raise that money? What taxes did you implement or whatever? And he just laughed and he said, we're in Texas. We don't tax ourselves. And it was all money from outside the community that can, you know, and the power of coordination. So Ben alluded to the work that the 8 years that we worked together and that he worked with Condon, and just one example, but there's a lot of them. There's cleaning up the river, there's the streets, there's all kinds of examples. But one of them is the street levy that was about 4 years ago, 460 million, maybe it was 5 years ago, 460 million. They had a lot of stuff they had to get done, and they couldn't afford it. And so we ended up doing something that normally doesn't happen. City Hall walked down the street, and we met with everybody at the school district. And we started talking about what they were trying to accomplish. And we had a conversation, not unlike every one of you have with your families, with your friends, to solve problems. And they needed to build a few schools. Couldn't afford it. And we said, well, we started to look at the hurdles. And one of the main was they didn't have land. Well, the city has a lot of land. So we identified land on the South Hill. That's the school up there. We identified land out at Joe Albi Stadium. That's where the school is there. We identified land off of Foothills. That's where the school is going in there. And the list went on and on and on. Ultimately, we raised $460 million without raising the property tax levy, which is where that comes from. By moving things around, timing things, kind of the way you refinance your house, taking advantage of interest rates and other things, without raising taxes. $460 million, built 3 new schools, and redid a lot of other schools like Sacagaway. I mean, you see the construction going on all around our community, all without raising taxes, and all simply by working together. The Attorney General's office tried to stop us from giving that land because they said it was gifting, public gifting. And we're like, we're gifting to our school district? How could that be gifting? And you have to take risks like that. And we actually had a threatened lawsuit before they backed down, and we were allowed to give that land to our schools. Why should have that been a conflict at all? And for the betterment of our community. Now, that's just a story that talks about the power of getting together. So when you take those 8 agencies that Ben is talking about, and you pull them under the same roof, and nobody wants to talk about governance and policy and structures and formats like that, but that's what it's all about. What we're talking about right now, and Chris was talking about kind of the inside baseball, what we're working on right now is something like what's called a public development authority, which is an overarching organization to bring all the moving pieces of the homelessness apparatus under one governance, so they can all share information and all work together. And it's when you hear that and you say that will solve our homelessness issue, nobody believes it. And the mayor, 3-term mayor in Houston, said nobody believed it. But in fact, the hardest thing you can do in politics is to get everybody to work together and work off the same sheet. So getting the counties and cities, it's probably not a newsflash, don't work well together most often. But we're already forming those bridges right now, and they have worked together periodically, and a lot of time in those 8 years when Ben and David were working together. So getting the county on board is, the first step. Getting the public housing agencies, getting all the nonprofits together, getting the medical facilities, the mental health facilities, getting all those into the same room, sharing information, and then the CFO in me will tell you, and it's like follow the money. But once you control all of the revenues, once you manage to gather those, the HUD dollars and the nonprofit dollars and the endowment dollars, the city dollars, the county dollars, once you start to pull all those together, nobody can say no. So suddenly when you have duplicative efforts in different parts of the community, because that's what they do, even though they're people that are trying to do well for our community, they're not coordinated, so they naturally duplicate. They naturally do things in a not so efficient or effective manner. And then you have a central governance suddenly saying you're going to do it this way. They're going to rebel against that. There'll be pushback. It's change. We all resist change. But that central organization, I'll call it the Public Development Authority, will control all the dollars. And then you follow a really key principle that we all follow in various ways in our lives. You get the right people on the bus. So you hire really good management. The Coalition for Homelessness is what it's called in Atlanta, and Mike Nichols, that runs that, was the first guy to say, I don't know anything about homelessness. I mean, this is a guy that runs the whole show in Houston. And he says, I don't really know anything about it. And he's a corporate guy. He was a senior VP for Cisco Foods, $100 billion company that distributes all the food around our nation, and that wanted to do something about homelessness in his home community. And so he was basically doing this at a tiny fraction of his normal salary. And he said, I don't know anything about homelessness, but I know how to hire the right people, and I know how to block and tackle and enable those people to do what they know how to do. And so he hired the very best people that knew all about homelessness, and he enabled them and gave them, blocked and tackled for them so they could do what they knew how to do and do it effectively. And he brought the dollars together. And again, I'll just tell you, once you come together and you agree and you work in the same direction, money is never the problem. And I can tell dozens of stories about that at the city. When you're not in the same, it's just like at home. If you're having a budget issue and it just kind of feels grim, when you get everybody in the same room and listening to each other and talking, you prioritize, you make decisions that make sense for the whole organization, in this case your family, and you figure it out. And that's the one thing that government frankly, really struggles with. That's the real secret sauce. That's what we heard in Atlanta. We've talked to Atlanta a lot. That's what we heard in Houston in our time there. We've talked to Houston a lot since then. And that is the secret sauce, is getting everybody together and working together. So if you as a group are wondering, what can I do? Support this notion of leadership. I mean, here's what leadership looks like in this case. The city has to get out of the business of homelessness. They've got to get out of the business of homelessness. The county has to get out of the business of homelessness and give that authority over through a public development authority, through governance that they can all agree on, so that that central authority with all those moving parts can coordinate and move forward in a way that I can almost assure you we would all agree with. But until that happens, I see cities, Seattle, Portland, San Diego, cities with a lot more money than Spokane has, throwing billions, in the case of LA, as Chris said, and they're not getting, their graphs look, they're going like this. Whereas Houston and Atlanta are going like this on homelessness because they figured out how to work together. The only two cities in America that have figured that out.
And to elaborate on, I mean, Spokane is a $1.3 billion business, if I'm correct, if I remember the numbers.
Yeah.
And I say $1.3 billion business because that's exactly what the city of Spokane is. It's a business. And if you run it with the profit and loss balance sheets, you understand the statements, you understand where you're going to invest, where you're not going to invest, where the financial bean counters, who have the expertise in the room, who are smarter than me on that stuff, then you hire those people to do what's necessary. You look at San Diego, which is a $4.3 billion agent company. Then you look at Los Angeles, where they just spent $16 billion on homelessness, just homelessness. And you look at San Francisco, you look at Seattle, you look at Portland. But all of this inclusive, and I'll get in a little bit in the weeds on this, but some may not know this, but there's also what we call the blueprint for criminal justice here in the state of Washington, Spokane, which we can use, which affects the accountability pieces, which affects the courts, which affects the law enforcement. And everybody in this room will say safety and concern and building and the cost of living and everything else is on their mind. Everything that we're talking about right now can be done with people who are willing to work with each other and work with some really savvy, smart people to get it done. It does work. Mandy made it work in Houston. Mark made it work in Houston. Both those are professionals. Now, it's when you become someone who is known to be able to fix problems like homelessness. First of all, I would tell you, if you ever want to go into homelessness as a career, don't. You're delusional. It's tough. It's complex. It's emotional. You go home with a lot of headaches. You wake up with a lot of headaches. The days are long and endless, but it's worth tackling something to make sure you do it for the right reasons. It doesn't mean I'm going to become your best friend, because I'm probably going to come to your neighborhood and say, guess what we want to do? We want to do something like build low-income housing, or we want to do something like that, but there are federal rules that allow you to make sure you have to provide that with state, federal, county, and public dollars. But you bring developers who also bring a lot of those dollars that brings money to things that are for high-value homes, for people to understand, hey, look, this is a quality of life. As one of those kids who was on the street, who lived on food stamps and did everything else, I can tell you there is a quality of life on the other side once you get the chance, but you've got to earn it. So I don't want people to think that what we're talking about is not supporting people here who aren't going to work for it. That is going to be part of the recipe. That is, it's expected. But there is the part of the population, like Gavin said, you're going to have a really hard time getting some of these people to work 5 hours in a day, 2 hours in a day. Now, if I add the people with individual developmental disabilities, which is about 37,000 in the state of Washington right now that need housing, it's a different complex issue. But what we're dealing with is not going to be something that's easy. You have to have an economic city. If you don't have a thriving economic city, you don't have a thriving health sciences division. Without both of those two in tandem together, you will not have a successful city. You need the hospitals. You need the Eastern State, Western State, Lakeland Village, whatever it is. All of those parts have to become part of the tools. We're not going to ask them to expand the Eastern State Hospital, but we do need to fund mental health better. We do need to fund co-occurring addictions and other pieces to that, but you also have to hold people accountable. And yes, I think people will bring up legislatively criminal justice on drug addiction and so on. Yes, that is factual. We have to deal with that. You can't expect to legalize drugs and expect to something change overnight, which is not going to happen. But you also have to deal with the root issue. What created it? How do you front-end funding that? And how do you make sure it doesn't happen again so that 6-year-old who becomes taken into Child Protective Services doesn't become part of the system at 20 years of age because now they're in jail for 3 or 4 times and the system continues and they have more kids in the same situation. You have to be able to deal with the situation at hand.
I think now would be a good time to turn it over to Q&A. So I will come around with the mic. If Ben and Chris, you guys wouldn't mind sharing the handheld that remains here, that'd be great. And I'll come to you first.
Hi, Mr. Patterson, right? I totally get, having been a parent, having worked with people who have mental health issues, having been out at Camp Hope, I get the accountability piece. I used to serve with juvenile court on an accountability board. So I understand the individual accountability, but I've got to admit, when you first started out with there's got to be accountability, I went right away to those who do manage billions of dollars of money and who do sign contracts. So when I look at the level of harm done or not doing the good, the community good, I totally welcome one entity to be responsible for all of this funding because I see a lot of harm done to the community by not spending those dollars better and well to the benefit of individuals and our greater community. So I really hope this goes forward because we need that, and we need those systems that can help individuals in their growth forward. We need those to function better.
And that's the plan. The plan is when Gavin discussed it, we've discussed, okay, how do we have metrics that are going to hold people accountable? That means the agencies providing services. That's been the biggest rub for every one of us on the stage and business owners across. How do you hold standards? With something like this, you write the contracts and the policies in which that are serving those individuals that they have to provide good data. That's the other key piece, a good data collection system. And you also have to have accountability for the provider. So you do not have mismanagement and or fraud or embezzlement in funds. So there's protections. So that when you have public-facing dollars, there's transparency. You can see where every penny went, and there's checks and measures to make sure that one person doesn't have full access to an account, and there's where it takes 2 or 3 individuals. This is not new. This is something that businesses do every day. So yes, that is the focus.
Oh, I was just going to say on the piece, I think what I hear you're saying is that you'd get more accountability if you had that one central agency. But it also does hold, like, it is controversial in the, like, if you talk to the nonprofits in Houston, Dow ran a large organization that probably had like 10 different business units doing different things, trying to meet the great need out there. But the central organization said, what you do really well is provide services in housing, and you're getting better results at that part of what you're managing. So instead of doing 10 different things, you're going to do services inside of housing, and that's all your nonprofit's going to do. And you over here, you build housing really well, but you may not be providing the strongest services. And we know what the national data shows, and it shows it in towns that are doing well when you provide housing and help, that service level, you get about 80 to 85% of those people stabilizing, and then a lot of them move on and free up more room for others. And so that agency will allow that accountability. But yeah.
And I'll just say about the agency, Chris's group, business was such a huge part of what Houston did, and they were kind of slow to come into it because they didn't trust government, imagine. And but they did come into it, and when they saw them getting the results, the actual results, they came into it strong. So the owner of the Astros, the owner of the Texans, We had this, Bob Urey was this guy we met with that represented all of downtown Houston, and they were amazing. But Chris's group, we're ahead of Houston, where Houston was at the outset already, because getting business together and getting them on board to have this central organization to tackle this problem was really hard to get business on board. Business is there supporting it. We're meeting at 7:30 Monday morning for, I think, 4 or 5 hours with Hello for Good. And we're pounding out the details of what that central organization looks like so everybody can be comfortable not just with the idea of a central organization, but with the notions of governance, building the trust, knowing that what that organization promises to do will be done. And those details matter a lot. So I really appreciate the support of Hello for Good and Chris and in supporting this notion that we're bringing back from Houston.
Thank you. We have another question.
I was just curious about the timeline in each of these cities. How many years did it take for them to start seeing improvement in housing the unhoused?
It was a couple of years. If you look at the chart, it doesn't immediately go down. And they, what's that?
Houston was 10 years.
Yeah, well, 10 years is that 65% decrease. And what you notice there, too, is if you talk to that average person on the street that hadn't been paying attention that they had a 65%, they'd tell you homelessness is awful, even though it's decreased more than any other metro area in the United States. We were sitting at dinner on our first night, and a woman came up to our table. She was drunk. She was flirting with Gavin. And that's how we knew she was drunk. I cracked myself up. But she was from Dallas, and we were asking her because we're in town to see how Houston is succeeding, right? And she was like, "Oh, Houston, they got a big homelessness problem." And we're like, "No, yours is actually going up." And Gavin's pulling out his chart showing her that, Dallas has actually gone up and Houston's is going down. You might be but it takes time. And like one of the rules in Houston is you can't clear a camp unless you're offering them housing and help. You don't just clear a camp to clear a camp. So there are still a couple camps that they're working on clearing 10 years later. Now, they're nothing the size of what we have in Spokane, but there's like data that shows that if you just move them along, it's not going to solve the problem. And if you want to solve it, it may not be visible to everybody, and it takes time. But that's why in our really fast-paced world of like people forget what they're mad about like 2 days later and don't pay attention to the issues of the world, you need a neutral organization, because otherwise every single election cycle every year is going to be just, what are the quick solutions? What sounds nice to me? And that's why you need that neutral organization that takes the politics out of it in order to really solve the problem, because it's going to be grinding work, right? Like it takes time and it takes individual work. I just always remember the NPR story I was listening to a couple years ago as they housed the last person in Times Square. And it was individual, and some of them had 6 caseworkers each, the homeless people that lived in Times Square. And this individual, before he talked to somebody, they'd had 45 conversations with him. But they got it done, right? It's time, it's effort, it's communication, but it's a lot of time. And it doesn't just happen.
It's not snap happen, but there's other things, there's other promises that are made. Houston made the promise that when you decommission an encampment, you will never see it again. So there's some really strict controls on this and promises that they make. And Anise Parker, that 3-term mayor, when we asked, because it was really hard for us to find an encampment, and after we had a couple hours of interviews, and we were at our home, we asked where an encampment was. We couldn't find one. We drove around for a long time and couldn't find one, and we had 3 camera guys, a couple sound guys. We're looking for an encampment that we wanted to film in Houston, couldn't find one. And we asked the mayor after the interviews, can you help us with that? And she said, you won't find one, because the rights of way are for the businesses and the people, and the rights of way were never designed for anybody to sleep on, and it doesn't help them either. So there's this kind of big compassion As you walk into her home, she had adopted, I think, 4 or 5 children, one of them off the streets, and he was now a lawyer in his 40s. A lot of compassion there, obviously, but really a toughness, tough love or whatever you would call it, and an accountability where when we get rid of an encampment, it's gone. And you're not going to see people sleeping on the streets, and our businesses are going to thrive downtown because, that's the core. As the CFO of the city, we lose our downtown, and believe me, homelessness will be the least of our problems as a community. So we're not going to lose our downtown, but we need that central organization.
I know I've been over here. I'm going to come over there in just a sec, but I promised him he could ask a question.
Hi, I own a small business in Spokane, and employees 16 to 85 who are now terrified to walk into the business on their own. The homeless around our business have become so emboldened because there is no discipline that they've been approached, they've been harassed, they've been scared, terrified. We barely made it through 2020. Gavin, you made the comment that there should be no criminal justice involvement at all. And for me, my concern for my employees' safety, especially the 85-year-olds that can't protect themselves, it brings up a big concern because failure to correct or discipline a bad behavior, it condones the behavior, and consistently condoning behavior codifies it into existence. Okay, and we have it codified in this town. So I volunteer with UGM. I've helped out with many homeless shelters in the past. I understand that you want to limit, but no criminal justice involvement.
And I first of all, I agree with everything you just said, and I have a lot of people I'm working with and people that I know that are experiencing the same thing. Jacob Grady, that helped organize this, is experiencing the exact same thing with his business. And I am really sorry I came across that way because, for instance, in Houston, when we're talking to Denise Parker, that 3-term mayor that was credited with this big turnaround, when you ask her about the percentage of people saying yes to this idea of housing and wraparound services, she gave something in the neighborhood of a 90% acceptance. I think it was 95, actually. But she also commented that for the 5% that said no, I'll tell you where to find them, was her comment. So no, there is absolutely a place, to your point, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, there is a place for the criminal justice system. So when I spoke fiscally about it not being the right solution, I meant it's not the right solution for the body of the problem, but the vast majority of the people in this situation are going to accept the housing and the services, and it's been proven. Once they go into that service, 90+% of them are still there 2 years later, per Houston numbers, per Atlanta numbers. But for those that won't participate, for those that fall out of that because they're not being accountable, to your point, absolutely. And yes, the criminal justice system can and should deal with that, and it's affordable and on that level. Thanks for pointing that out. I'm sorry I came across that way.
I want to elaborate a little bit on the question I had. There's what we would call, and this is something that came out of San Diego too, there's the have-nots, can-nots, and will-nots. So if there's 2/3 of the majority that want services, need services, will take services, don't know how to get services, then I'll take those odds. It's the 1/3 that we know they're going to have I'm not going to a shelter, I'm not going to abide by your rules, I'm not going to follow what you have to say. Well, there is a social rule of law you have to follow. And that is just the way it is in society. It doesn't feel like that at times. And I can see why people feel that way. And justifiably so. But yes, you're going to have to arrest them. You're going to have, unfortunately, criminally charge them or trespass them, whatever it might be. And some of those people might have warrants. Some of those people might be actively being sought after. I don't know. But you have to deal with the 1/3 of the population. But if you can deal with the other larger portion of the population to get them out of the way off the streets, that's the focus. And we'll deal with the other people who are resistant in a much harsher way.
And I just want to differentiate between offering somebody a shelter in jail and then offering them housing and services and case management to help them move along. And a lot of the rhetoric in the community now is Camp Hope needs to break up or they go to jail. That's just not going to work. There's not enough room in the jail for the people that don't want to stay in the shelters. And what Houston did was made sure they had housing available first. And if we really all like got along and we're talking about issues, like there's the jail, the third floor, if you've ever been in the jail, is a mental health ward. You walk off the elevator and everybody's very drugged up, and it's sad. And that needs to be fixed. The jail can't be the largest mental health facility in a county. That's a damn tragedy. You can't have the hospital full because of all the psych stays, and that when you have a COVID outbreak, your hospital goes overload and people are staying in the halls because of the psych overloads, because our community health, mental health system is so broken. You can't have a system that drives people down so much that addiction just keeps going up. And why is that? Because people are hopelessness. Like, start looking at why people use drugs. If I were homeless, I'd be on drugs. Like, I'm not going to stay on the street and be cold and sober. Like, I'm going to be drinking and doing something. That's just not realistic for me to sleep on the street if I lost my job and lost my house right now and be like, yeah, I'm going to stay sober. No way. I'd be drinking that away. And it's just like if I were actually on the street, that would be, but we can't use that. If somebody's breaking the law, they should be arrested. Saturday night, there were 2 trespassers at Camp Hope that didn't have badges. Everybody's badge that stays there. And they were coming in with stolen goods. And the police refused because nobody can get along to trespass anybody. So you have 15 to 20 people that are causing a lot of problems at Camp Hope right now that the police and the sheriff refuse to trespass and arrest. We need to be communicating too, because that neighborhood has seen an increase in crime. And if we want to address the crime in that neighborhood, then the police actually need to arrest the people that are staying at Camp Hope, that the people in charge at Camp Hope are saying, please come arrest us. So there's a lot of tension there, but everybody needs to be talking and dealing with each other, because there are bad apples right now at Camp Hope causing problems in the neighborhood. And everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. Everybody in the 7 floors at City Hall knows it, and they refuse to arrest them. Like, call your elected officials and say, police, go get rid of the trespassers at Camp Hope. They are causing problems in the neighborhood. That'd be a great thing for everybody to do. And then if I don't get a chance to talk again, please, the website for the housing series that Gavin is the host of is housingandhelp.org. It's not political. It's just about solutions. And there's 3 episodes up right now. One is 15 minutes. The other 2 are over 20 minutes. The 4th episode should be up in the next few days. But it's housingandhelp.org. And it's actually really, really super well done.
We're
taking the mic away.
So
I'm just going to say, on Housing and Help, the first 2 episodes are a lot about how we got in this problem, a lot about compassion around this problem. And I think people are getting into compassion fatigue. And, just a lot of people, and we've heard it, and for good reason. The 3rd episode and the 4th one coming out tomorrow, you'll hear a lot of what we're talking about here, but you'll hear it in the voices direct from Houston and others directly involved with this and demonstrating with numbers and hard facts and evidence of why this works. And so, right now we're just 3 people talking about it, but I think especially this 4th episode coming out tomorrow is really powerful if you're interested in solutions.
So my question, I want to start with this. It's my belief that the good of a solution is usually connected to an appropriate assessment of the problem. So the surgeon has to know what the illness is in order to do a good surgery. And so you guys have been talking about the complex nature of this problem, and also I think we're all aware that within our community, issues revolving around homelessness are not the only issues or problems that we have within our community. And so my question really is, if we were to diagnose, as we are trying to do, the issues around homelessness and provide a solution of housing, which I can't say that I'm necessarily all for or all against, but if we were to do that, I think COVID brought up that the issue wasn't just that people were getting sick, it's also that people were desperately lonely and isolated from relationship, and that was having a tremendous impact on people's well-being and mental health as well. So if homelessness is not just an issue for the homeless, but also maybe an indicator of something deeper systematically in our culture, which I personally believe is a love of comfort over a love of people, a love of my own individual community looking the way that I want it to, over maybe what's good for the whole of the community. I'm a pastor, by the way, so I'll try not to preach a message here. Then are we looking at the relational dynamic? Because I've talked to a lot of people both on and off the streets, and I can tell you that the most miserable people I know are the most lonely and isolated from relationships. So I just want to make sure we're also throwing in the piece that putting somebody off of maybe the street so that my community feels more comfortable and they get housing sounds great. But if it puts them in an apartment by themselves with the same struggles and issues that they've had before, aren't we in some way just bandaging up an even bigger problem and kind of just trying to put it out of sight, out of mind?
That's a big question. But I would argue the rise in addiction is because of isolation in society and lack of community. I would say that it's housing and help. It can't just be housing, it has to be help. That can be mental health services, that can be addiction services, but it's also a peer counselor. Peer counseling is seen, the data is really good, and that case management through peer counseling, somebody who's experienced that creates that relationship, and I think that's a base of a lot of what you're saying, and I think that that'd be pointing, if I were to say, okay, homelessness decreased in Houston 63% over the last 10 years, your question is, well, why didn't it, if that was the solution, why isn't it, what happened to those 37% of people that it hasn't happened to? And what aren't we looking?
That's not my question at all. My
Well-
question more is, no matter what money goes into it, we as a community have to decide to make friends with uncomfortable people and be in real relationships with people it's difficult to be in relationship with. Otherwise, our community is not going to solve this issue no matter what funding gets poured into it.
Yeah, and I don't think Houston would say they solved it. They're managing it, and they're decreasing it, but they're the only city in the country to decrease it and manage it. And I'd say high rent does increase homelessness, but I think you raised a lot of good points.
To elaborate on your question, which I understand clearly, in order for things to change, I'll say it in human nature, community is not one person. Community is many people, regardless of your background, your race, your creed, your financial status. The reason why I survived is because I had mentors. I had people I could call. I was arrested many times as a juvenile, so I got many, many times of trouble. But I had mentors who were there to pull me through the other side. A lot of them were faith-based folks. A lot of them were people you would least expect, but they were there to give me guidance every time I called. And I didn't wear out the welcome mat. I took it serious. So if they took the time to invest in me and giving me advice, I listened. Not every time. But it is a sense of community where you need people to support each other. It doesn't mean you're there to solve their problems, but you do have an overarching support system to back up your back against when you're feeling challenged, weak, upset, emotionally. I mean, I can go through the list of everything, but it is a sense of community, and that's what I know Spokane to be very good at. From my memory, at 53 years of age, I've always seen Spokane step up. And I think that's why we have the chance. We're not the huge city yet. We're the second largest city in the state, but we do have a chance to do something right as a collective. And I'm not a puppies and rainbows guy. I'm a real straight shooter. So sometimes you just got to deal with the facts. And if you can come straight forward and deal with it, the rest comes with it. And there is people who are willing to step up. Hopefully that helped.
I just want to mention a lot of the commentary in my case especially, I'm talking about that chronically homeless population, which is the visible population, about 2,000 per last year's point in time count. If you ask Houston what their chronically homeless population is, they'll tell you what it was the day before, because they got that kind of data capability. And so it's a much different proposition in Houston than it is here. But the 2,000 is triage. And it doesn't get to the deeper issues you're talking about at all. But this central construct, they immediately begin to turn their attention from the chronically homeless to the deeper issues that you're talking about as they're able to. But for now, we are truly in a triage situation. And so that's what mostly I've been talking about in terms of the finances and other things. But then you move on to the much more nuanced and very important issues about the fabric of our community. And I really appreciate that.
Can you guys take one more question?
Ben likes to talk. Oh! That's that straight shooter again.
So my question is, it sounds like you've been working on this for quite some time. It sounds like you've got a solution. You've got the ideas. What are your obstacles? What is the biggest obstacle standing in your way? And what would you say to me and a group of Unitarians that I'm looking at who want to do something? Would you tell us to stand down, stand by? We've got time that you need to get past some obstacles. What do? We want to help.
The mayor, we talked into going to Houston, and she went, was it last week? And a group of people, key people in the community with her. And I think she saw the same thing that we're talking about here. They met with the mayor. They met with a lot of the same people we met with. They were only there for one day, and I hope they don't come back with ideas about how to fix it, because that's what that central organization will do. They'll have the ideas. You hire the right people, you get them all together, and they come up with the ideas. But what I'm really hopeful, the message they came back with was the importance of getting everybody together and working off the same page. So if I was the mayor now, after coming back from Houston, I'd be talking to the county. I'd be talking to Spokane Valley. I'd be talking to the providers, those funded by government dollars, those funded by private dollars. They're all essential. If we had a dotted line out to Kootenai County, we should, because we need everybody on board. There's no geographic boundaries to this problem. But I'm just demonstrating or talking about the importance of leadership here, and that's where, if you're wondering what to do, support that leadership to create that central authority. And it's going to be really hard. If you're the mayor and you say, hey, we're going to get out of the business of homelessness tomorrow, we've been there. The first thing you're going to hear you're going to hear a hue and cry from the organization itself, saying, wait, you're getting rid of us? Are you crazy? And of course, they're probably not. They'll probably migrate, a lot of them, from the one to the central, and there'll be a lot more. But people resist that kind of change, and there'll be huge resistance to a change of this magnitude that we're talking about from every part of the homelessness apparatus in our community. There'll be some leaders that step up and say, this is what we need, and there'll be a lot saying no. So to the extent you can support that, I believe that's the critical issue right in front of us right now, and it can't happen. It's got to be nonpartisan. Don't wait for next year's mayoral election. It's now. The people you know, the businesses you know, I mean, just the people that approached us,
Like, if you could do one thing is go watch housingandhelp.org. If you like it, send the link to 20 of your friends. Then go speak in open forum at city council. Figure out, I don't even know when the county commission meetings are, but I think they're on like Tuesday afternoons. Somebody go talk to the county commissioners about how great you heard Houston was, or send them an email that says watch these videos and learn
Chris is a part of
about
this.
solutions.
It's one of our interviews with her.
Like, just let as many people know as possible is going to be one of the keys. As many people as possible, and then when it bubbles up, and let's say Mayor Woodward stands up and says, like, holds a press conference with Commissioner Cooney, and they say, let's go, and we're going to implement Houston, cheer them on. Like, if they do that, I will be right behind them saying, yes, go, because that's the solution. And it's a win, right, for everybody. It's a huge win. And so we need to be supporting whoever supports this solution.
Chris told me to take one more question.
My understanding is that Houston has reduced its homeless population over the last 10 years by over 60%. It's also my understanding, though, that the crime rate in Houston, along with all other major cities across the U.S., has been consistently going up or remaining pretty stagnant. So that if we're reducing homelessness, and we know based on just our own metrics here, Camp Hope is increasing crime rate in its localized area. So homelessness does contribute to an increase in property crime, violent crime. So in a situation where we're reducing homelessness pretty dramatically, and we're not reducing crime rate, what did Houston do wrong, and how are we going to be different?
There is crime in that neighborhood specifically because people are not trespassed there that they know should be trespassed, that have violated the law. But to say that homelessness always equates to crime is wrong.
And I'll just go back to my CFO thing. You do need a strong criminal justice system in every city, of course, and that's just good governance. I've seen an erosion of our budget. Where we are with our city budget right now scares the daylights out of me. And 60% of the city's general fund budget, 60.8 when I left, goes to public safety, rightly so. And we're going to really have a hard time maintaining current funding levels or increasing them the way we need to. I mean, there's so many opportunities to make the criminal justice system part of what works in our community, and they need that support. But that's in danger too. But again, so right now we're talking homelessness, but criminal justice gets into it in a big hurry, and that to me is a budget issue.
Thank you all so much for coming out, for caring enough, and for being willing to listen. And thank you most of all to our three panelists. That was extremely interesting and informative, and I think we all really appreciate it.
Good job.
Yeah, true. It's getting old. Yeah, right. I gotta hit Phil Altmaier here. Mr. Altmaier, I would really like to have coffee with you.
Yeah.
When I talk like this, I know a lot about public development authorities, and I'm the first guy to admit I don't know shit about homelessness.
Yeah.
But I would really appreciate thoughts and ideas you have
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah, I'm dying to find out if Houston's saying they reduced 65% because they simply got housing. And then did they create what we created in our housing first in the areas that they house the people? Because you know what's happening in our city, where all our housing first is. We've provided the housing. We got less people housed. But what's happened?
And the services aren't there. They're not funding the support part.
Everyone's here.